Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. A very good morning, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. We hope you're keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from today. Today we're delighted to be discussing what the Agri-Environmental Programmes for water quality is about, the water's life approach to process and people is a topic we'll be discussing today. And we know from recent EPA reports that Ireland's waterways continue to be under pressure and that agriculture has a critical role to play in turning the tide. And the Waters of Life programme represents a collaborative landscape scale response, one that places farmers and land managers at the heart of water quality solutions. And to learn more about the programme, we're delighted to be joined by Anne Goggin, who's project manager of the Waters for Life programme, Ross O'Donoghue, who's communications and stakeholder relationships manager, and Philip Murphy, catchments coordinator in the Blackwater catchments. You're all very welcome to the webinar, and I hope you're keeping well this morning. Good morning, Anne. You're no stranger to the Signpost webinar. Maybe could you tell us a bit of background, maybe before we start into the presentation, just maybe about the project and your own role?
Yeah, the project is an EU co-funded Life Integrated project. It will run up until 2029. Its main focus is to protect and restore high status objective rivers. Integrated projects are a particular class of life project. They aim to influence policy ultimately, so we would aim to influence any future agri-environmental programs, and they also aim to leverage complementary funding for water quality measures or for the measures related to the project, in this case water quality, either publicly or private finance. So we're very much aligned with the Law Pro Blue Dot programme. We are coordinated by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and we have 11 other project partners, including Teagasc and the Department of Agriculture and Law Pro.
Great. Well, look, I don't want to steal too much of your thunder in your presentation. So we will have time for questions at the end of the presentation as well. So we're going to have two separate presentations, one from Anne to start, and then Ross, you're going to give us a follow-up then on some of the outreach work that you've been doing. And Philip has kindly agreed to support our questions and answers after the presentation. So please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen.
Very good.
Right.
So thanks very much, Mark. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming along. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the context for our agri-environmental programme, the process we undertook to develop it, and the final shape that the programme took. And then I'm going to hand over to Ross, and as Mark said, he'll talk a little bit about our programme's education and awareness element. I've covered this already, just what the Waters of Life is about, so I won't cover that again. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the status of our rivers at the moment. The loss of high status waters in Ireland has been an ongoing and serious issue since the late 1980s, and reversing that trend is a key objective of the Water Framework Directive and of the Waters of Life project and the Water Action Plan for Ireland. So this graph shows the changes in status of our rivers since the baseline for the Water Framework Directive was established in the 2007 to 2009 monitoring period. And since that baseline was established, we've lost almost a third of our high status rivers. But if we go back further, the picture is even more stark. Since the late 1980s, the number of pristine river monitoring sites has declined from about 500 to around 20, so a decline of 96%. And just a word on status. Status is assigned to all water bodies under the Water Framework Directive. And that status can vary from high, which is close to natural conditions and showing little or no impact from human activity, all the way down to bad, where it's seriously polluted with very little capacity to support any form of aquatic life. So in this context, it's important to distinguish between high status rivers and high status objective rivers. High status rivers are currently achieving all the conditions for that status. High status objective rivers are rivers which were at high status, but may have fallen below high status and have been set the objective of being restored to high status by 2027. The ones that are at high status have the objective of retaining that status. So there's two classes of water body in high status objective. Those that are achieving the status and have to maintain it, those who've fallen below the status and have to get back up to it. So in our current water action plan, 334 high status rivers have been identified. At the moment, only 139 of those are achieving high status. So that's only around 40% of our high status objective rivers are currently achieving that status. High status water bodies are usually located in relatively remote upland areas, and as a result, the profile of pressures acting on them are slightly different to the profile of pressures acting on water bodies generally across the country. The main pressure is what's called hydromorphology, and this refers to changes in the physical form of the river or the flow in the river. This is followed by agriculture, anthropogenic pressures, and forestry. Anthropogenic pressures are, where there's an impact, but the actual sector causing the impact hasn't been definitely identified. Just a word as well on hydromorphology. A lot of agricultural activities or a lot of hydromorphological pressures come from activities related to forestry and agriculture, such as drainage works. So the issues in a river are the way that the particular pressure manifests itself in that water body. So the biggest issue by far in our high status objective water bodies are physical damage to the habitat. And this is followed by nutrient pollution and sediment. The project is working in 5 demonstration catchments around the country, with the 6th acting as a control. The 5 demonstration catchments were chosen because they contain high status water bodies, or high status objective water bodies, first of all, and they also reflect the range of pressures affecting high status objective rivers more generally around the country. And you can see the list of catchments here. In terms of the pressures and issues affecting these water bodies, 3 in particular are affected by agricultural pressures. They are the Aubeg, the Islands, and the Graney. And you can see here on the far right what the issues those pressures are causing. The primary issue in the Aubeg is nutrients, followed by fine sediment, with some issues related to organic matter and some barriers to fish passage. In the Islands, which is a poorly drained and peaty catchment, agriculture and hydromorphology are the big pressures. And the way that's manifests in the river is very high levels of fine sediment, and the river has been very much straightened and deepened, which has removed a lot of the important habitat. In the Shornock, agriculture and wastewater, the pressures, primarily agriculture, and here it's really nutrients are the biggest issue. One of the first steps we took in developing our agricultural program was to look at what the general characteristics of high status objective water bodies were, where they were located, the type of terrain, what the pressures and issues were. And then we developed a series of annexes which looked at the measures that could be taken for each different sector impacting on them and related to each issue, and then looked at the effectiveness of those measures. So there were measures developed for all of the range of pressures, but today I'm just going to focus on the agricultural measures. This framework document and the agricultural annex are available on our website. They're very useful documents in that they take each of the issues that could occur, be it nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment. They look at the setting it occurs in, poorly drained or free drained, and then it ranks the effectiveness of measures from high to low. From the outset, the plan was to incorporate a results-based element in our agri-environmental programme. So the next step we took was a detailed review of existing results-based schemes, including the pearl mussel catchment, wild Atlantic nature, the hen harrier project, the Burn project, and Acres, which was just being introduced at the time we were doing this work. This was followed by a series of facilitated workshops and consultations with a range of subject matter experts and various stakeholders. And the output from these consultations and workshops was a vision for what a high status objective catchment should look like in an agricultural context. And this kind of summarizes what the various experts and stakeholders felt we needed to be trying to achieve. The first thing really, and this came across time and time again, was high quality riparian zones. This is the zone immediately adjacent to the river. And the feeling was that these zones should be capable of providing important ecosystem services and also an interconnected network of nature corridors. These areas form part of the river ecology, so they're very important from overall river health point of view. Good quality water kind of goes without saying, but it's not just good water quality for the river itself at that location. It has to be good enough to preserve downstream water bodies. So estuaries in particular are very sensitive to nitrate loads. So even though that mightn't show in the river, if the nitrate loads are above a certain level, it will impact on the downstream estuary. Retain natural flow and form of the river or restore that where it has been lost. Ensure that farms are nutrient efficient to the greatest extent possible so that losses of nitrogen and phosphorus are minimized, and have locally tailored solutions that are appropriate to the environments they're installed in. Ensure healthy peatlands that don't cause issues such as acidification or siltation of our rivers, and finally support conditions for protected species and habitats. So this definition of an ideal catchment led on to a number of principles which underpinned the development of our agri-environmental programme. But we were always mindful of the need to focus on factors that were within an individual landowner's control. So the first principle was that high quality semi-natural habitats reflect low inputs and extensive management practices, and these can have a protective effect on local water quality. Therefore, we introduced these following scorecards: semi-natural grassland, grassland and peat, woodland and scrub, and peatland, to allow us to assess the health of these types of habitat. These scorecards were quite similar to the Acres equivalents, but there was more of an emphasis on the hydrology of the site and the drainage on the site. The payment per hectare was also similar to Acres, with one difference, and that was we paid a riverside bonus where, based on the condition of the riverbank and the nature of the activities being carried on in the riparian zone and the health of that riparian zone. The next principle was that even on very intensively managed land, an area of semi-natural vegetation, including trees adjacent to the river, can have multiple benefits for water quality, for the overall health of the river, for biodiversity, and for climate. And this led to the development of two new scorecards, which are very specific to the waters of life. These are the Riverside Habitat Scorecard on improved grassland and the Riverside Habitat Scorecard on tillage. Through research, the team identified a width of 20 metres as being the optimum balance between providing space for the river and not impacting on agricultural productivity. As a result, the project pays farmers for whatever width they provide up to a maximum of 20. So whatever fenced or uncultivated width they provide up to a maximum width of 20, we will pay on that. And the payment is up to 2,000 per hectare, depending on the quality of the habitat. The habitat will score better if the vegetation is more complex, so meaning greater that you have a tree layer, you have a shrub layer, and you have a ground layer. And trees in particular are very important. They provide huge benefits for rivers, including shading to prevent temperature and overheating, woody debris, which can provide important in-stream habitat, leaf litter, which provides foods for aquatic organisms, and they also provide habitat for wildlife and corridors for wildlife movement. The payment, which seems very generous, is based on the gross margin for these more productive farms where this measure is targeting. Just a little bit more on the Riverside Habitat scorecards. One of the elements used to assess status in potentially high status rivers is hydromorphology. And the technique used is the River Hydromorphological Assessment Technique, or the RAT for short. And that looks at a number of different features of the river, including the physical form of the river, the flow in the river, the condition of the riverbed, its connection to the floodplain, barriers to fish passage, amongst others. Our Riverside Habitat Scorecard assesses 3 elements of the RAT that are within the control of an individual landowner. And these are the bank structure and stability, the bank and bank top vegetation, and the riparian land use within 20 metres. A recent analysis, sorry, I've gone a bit ahead of myself. A recent analysis by Ed Cox of LawPro showed that where high status objective sites are failing to achieve a high RAT score, the 3 elements that I've mentioned are the primary drivers of that failure. So that gave confidence that we had gone in the right direction with our Riverside Habitat Scorecard and the approach we took in that. The next issue was that some things that impact on water quality, such as nutrients and sediment, don't readily lend themselves to a results-based approach. And for that reason, we introduced a number of general actions where the farmer would be paid a set amount if they took up the action. So this wasn't results-based, this was payment for the measure. This is a list of those actions here, and I'm just going to quickly run through them one by one. The runoff risk assessment is a whole farm assessment which applies to all farms in the programme. It aims to identify areas on the farm where nutrients and or sediment could be lost through overflow and flow or via surface drainage networks. It consists of a desk study which looks at available mapped information such as the PIP maps, the PIP flow paths, the flow delivery points, and also a farm visit to confirm the risky locations for losses on the farm. Based on the findings of the assessment, the assessor can recommend mitigation actions which will be funded through the project. However, those actions have to be justified on the basis that they're the right measure in the right place for the particular problem that was identified. I'm sure as you all know, nutrient management planning is the basic action for efficient management of organic and chemical fertilizers on a farm. This was offered as an optional action in the catchments where nutrients weren't a problem, as it contributes towards the protect objective of the Water Framework Directive in those locations. In the 2 Cork catchments, the Orbeg and the Shornock, where nutrients were a significant issue, this measure was mandatory for all participants. However, the scale of the reduction needed in those 2 catchments were such that nutrient management planning alone is not sufficient to address the problem. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem in Cork, in the Shornock catchment, the nitrate load in the river is estimated to be almost 1,200 kilograms per day as N. So that's the amount of nitrogen that is washed down the river system in a day. That would need to be reduced to 522 kilograms per day to achieve the estuarine limit of 2.6 milligrams per litre N, which is significantly higher than the figure that's considered to be appropriate for high status. But it is a good figure to work to because it protects the downstream estuaries. That's a reduction of about 44% in the nitrate load in the river. And that equates to a reduction in N losses of 20.5 kilograms per hectare per year across the entire catchment. To put that figure in perspective, it's equivalent to about 1/5 of a livestock unit. Now, I have to qualify this by saying it's a coarse estimate because some areas of the catchment will be riskier for N loss than others, but it does give an idea of the scale of the issue we're trying to address. And for that reason, we introduced additional nitrate measures in the Cork catchments. AgNav was one of those measures. This is a system that's developed by Board BIA and Teagasc, originally developed for carbon emissions and climate action, but subsequently developed to have a water quality element. It calculates farm gate N&P balances using data from ICBF, Milk Co-ops, and the Borbia Sustainability Audit. Within AgNav is a forecaster tool which allows a landowner to scenario test different strategies for reducing nutrient surpluses. And from that, a farm-specific action plan can be developed. I suppose one issue at the moment with AgNav is that it doesn't currently account for clover fixed nitrogen. Clover is an excellent climate measure in that it reduces emissions of nitrous oxide, but at the moment, the current thinking is that clover fixed nitrogen leaches to water in much the same way as any other nitrogen fertilizer. Pasture-based Ireland is something you might well be familiar with as well as a grass measurement tool, and that is its primary purpose. However, PBI can collect very precise data on grass growth, fertilizer applications and timing. And if that data is combined with local weather data, it can be used to populate Teagasc's most grass growth model. And based on that model, it can provide farm-specific guidance on optimum fertilizer amounts and timings. So we're very much encouraging all of the dairy farmers in our Cork catchments to take up the PBI measure and to record a minimum of 30 covers per year so that their data can be used to populate the most grass growth model, and they can avail of this tailored service which will give them that advice about spreading fertilizer on their farm. So those are our main grassland nitrogen reduction measures. For the tillage land, we have catch crops and min-till. The All Beg in particular has a very high amount of tillage in the context of high status rivers. And in order to control both nutrient and sediment loss, we've introduced these two measures. Catch crops mop up excess nutrients during the fallow period and bind the soil together to prevent erosion, while min-till techniques reduce ground disturbance, which in turn reduces losses. The catch crops supported by the project are the non-leguminous species, and that's because leguminous plants such as clover, vetch, beans and peas fix nitrogen, which in turn adds an additional nitrogen load to the system and can therefore be somewhat counterproductive. I mentioned earlier about the runoff risk assessment leading to recommendation for mitigation measures. We fund a number of mitigation measures or supporting actions, as we call them, under the project, where these could either improve habitat or reduce runoff risk. These are the practical interventions such as fencing, alternative drinking points, sediment traps, spatially targeted riparian buffers, water table management in peat soils, and other measures that can be used to intercept flow pathways and reduce risk on the farm. These type of measures are particularly important in our islands catchment, where there are significant areas of poorly drained mineral soil and peat soil, a high density of drains, and where sediment is the major issue in the local rivers. So the last principle was that farmers and advisors should be empowered to make positive decisions for water quality and the environmental generally. And this led to the final and arguably the most important element of our programme, which is education and awareness. If advisors and landowners don't understand why they're undertaking certain actions and their benefit for the environment, our programme will just become another temporary income stream. Therefore, we've put a lot of emphasis and effort into developing and delivering training programmes for advisors working on the project and for participant farmers. To date, 81 advisors and 262 farmers have attended training events with the project. We've sent contracts to another 306 farmers who've expressed interest in the project, and training for new participants who sign up to those contracts will begin over the summer months. So I'm now just going to hand you over to Ross, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about the development and the delivery of our farmer and advisor training programs. Thank you very much.
So folks, will I jump in with a presentation, Mark?
No, you're welcome to share your slides, Ross.
Firstly, I always start with who's talking to you. Ross is my name. I'm in Clare. I'm well positioned to hit all of those subcatchments that Anne was talking about in her presentation there. I just want to rock through the kind of the scale and scope or approach. And really, I want to talk about what worked and what didn't work, because it's only when we look at what didn't work that we learn and we get better, and how we apply those learnings. And I think we'll be more example-led in our approach to farmer training. So, Anne spoke to you about the numbers there. I think that the nice one for us is that, we were able to assign kind of 64% of those trained advisors to working on our Agri-Environmental Programme pilot as well. So we canvassed the kind of first entrance into the training program, and we found that when it comes to catchment science, about half of the advisors wouldn't have had that training experience in catchment science. So there was a skills gap in the service. Look, it's an area that's become of huge relevance in recent years, and they have a crucial role in the project. Like, they really are the ambassadors for the program. They're the main point of contact. They're the ones doing the habitat assessment, which forms the basis of the results-based payment scheme, the runoff risk assessment. And that's a new element that's been in development, and it's like a really critical one in terms of how it flows into the water quality farm works plans and the support and actions, along with the general actions. Look, at those are the actions that protect and restore water quality, and those are the ones that we're funded to achieve. So we've limited time with the advisors, a lot to manage, very structured approach. That structure is kind of really built around making the most of the advisors' existing experience and skill set. And from there, we wanted them to understand the project and the program, because they'd be the ones explaining it to farmers on our behalf. So we need to introduce kind of some of the fundamentals of water quality and catchment science, just understand the objectives and how that kind of source pathway receptor model could make a real difference. And that really fed into the program delivery then, and getting the advisors operational as soon as possible. So we made it as practical as possible for that reason, and we really honed in on these learning outcomes, what they needed to learn about, what they needed to do, and we kind of worked backwards from there. We found the format based on what we needed them to learn, and we also needed advisors to take some ownership and address their own learning gaps. And a lot of that got reflected in the setup. The point here is that help is always at hand. We sat around at round tables, a staff member at every table. So a very collaborative approach as well. Project's a pilot. We need to learn lessons fast, implement them fast. Much of our work is around that source pathway receptor, and so is our training outcomes. And look, you'll see more. You'll see a definition of SPR here if you need it. But the learning for us heading into year 2 was really to properly hang our training on the hook of SPR. Year 1, we had all the information. We had some interactive and challenging ways to get it across. What you'll see here is kind of the standard running order for our induction training, and after some icebreakers, intro to the program, we look at what is a healthy river. Then we introduce the model, and we look at kind of catchment characteristics, runoff risk, supporting actions, general actions, catchment specific issues. But actually what we're doing here is we're really trying to thread that SPR model into a natural sequence. And just kind of one thing to add there is we really place a massive premium on the Q&A as part of the learning process. Some people might only learn if it's the answer to a question they ask. Some people might only learn if Philip Murphy is answering the question, but every question is valuable. And it's also true that the questions can sometimes pull focus in a presentation. So we got everyone to write the question on a post-it, we'd put it on the easel, and we'd make sure every question got asked before we moved on. And it kind of gets structured to unstructured learning. And you could kind of really draw a line under your morning's work, move on and do it again in the afternoon, and really feel like you're making progress based on the feedback you're getting in the room. Obviously, field work requires field training. That induction element is only one part of it. You've got the habitat, the runoff risk assessment, and you're trying to give that ongoing support as well. We wanted to front load the training to advisors and just to get them out onto farms, and we started with the habitat assessment. For some advisors, like the lads in like the Graney and East Clare and South Galway there, this would have been nothing new for them, but we needed training in every catchment to reflect just how different the habitats that Anne described to you are. And the Riverside habitat element in that scorecard was new to all of us. And we actually use this bespoke app out in the field. It's innovative. We'd love to share that with you another time, but to keep things familiar, the training, we actually trained them on the kind of the paper-based system. We didn't want them to, essentially, we didn't want them to learn the tin whistle and the tune at the same time. But in reality, that was a missed opportunity just to get them field training on the app itself. So that's something that we'll be tweaking for this year. In front loading the training, we gave ourselves another lesson to learn. We trained them up on the runoff risk assessment months before they were actually going to conduct the assessment. So getting the timing of your training right was another one. So overall satisfaction and learning on both sides. The year one advisors, they've been in the job a full 12 months now. We did a full review with them in January and February, detailed phone surveys, documented, anonymized and shared back. All in all, people were happy. I won't read the quotes. I'll just leave them up there for you, long enough for you to read them yourselves. But in terms of insights, I think 3 things we took from that is that time is an advisor's most precious resource, and clarity on the time estimates and expectations is probably the most helpful thing you can do, especially with something new. And 2 is being realistic, just being honest about time. As much as they help farmers with best practice, there isn't really that scope for behavioural change as we see it as part of the service. So if new methods or behaviours are needed, and we're talking about a mix of private and Teagasc here, then new resources are needed to deliver them too. And 3, and this is one you'll recognise if you've ever coached in sport, the best learning is player to player. As much as advisors learn from us, they really value the time with each other above all else, especially in the field. So that peer-to-peer learning is massive. And just having somebody beside you willing to ask the question that you might want to ask yourself. So just back to the whole approach, here's kind of what I'd summarise as the key points. 1, just, figure out what do people need to know and do and work backwards from there. 2, understand that everybody might need to get a little bit out of their comfort zone to get there, to actually get there. And 3, build on what they know and support them in what they don't know. And the plan, do, review. It just means you'll never waste an opportunity to get better. Looking at the farmer training, it's key for us, and give you some of the details there. We should say that, as it's a capacity building program, it is funded. So they're paid for their active participation, but as you'll see, it's very much active participation. The format's the same and the approach is the same around the learning objectives. I think just one of the things we did was just made sure there was more room for tea and chats, for us to chat to farmers, for farmers to chat to themselves. Look, it doesn't happen as often as it should, or sometimes we think it should. Small groups, again, facilitated by the scientist, or to be honest, if we didn't have enough scientists to go around, which can happen, we weren't afraid to ask the farmers to step up themselves and facilitate an exercise or facilitate a discussion, and that faith was absolutely repaid. This area review just kind of shows the setup. We didn't skip the science with the farmers. We were just really practical about it. So that's what I'll do for the last couple of minutes now, just kind of walk through some of those examples of how we tied it back into the farmers example in the programme. Habitat assessment, easy one, visual examples and results-based schemes say the higher the nature value, the higher the payment. So here's what 10 out of 10 looks like for semi-natural grassland, happy days. But what about this? Doesn't maybe look all that hectic, but actually, what if we said there was moderate to high number of positive indicators? Okay, moderately overgrazed and the bank is unstable, but there's no sign of damaging activity. So actually, it's a 6 out of 10 and an okay payment to boot. And now, what if you applied for a new fence and pulled it back to reduce your erosion and maybe did some tree planting to stabilise the bank, and your 6 out of 10 could be moving up a notch and your payments could be going with it and really bringing lads on that journey. And actually, then we just set them the task of scoring their own plot. Here's your positive indicator, ragged robin. Here's your damage from supplementary feeding. And now score it yourselves as a group and calculate back what you think the payment should be. Always really interesting to see the different approaches to that. Similar with the runoff risk assessments. Here's an example from the Island subcatchment, East Galway. This would be a very typical plot. You're chatting about your local soil type, your groundwater vulnerability. Here's your rivers, your drains, your flow directions. And so the group are now working together to find their own points of interest. They're seeing the drain connections. They're seeing the river crossing and the river connections. And now they're doing the math and how much money you can get for water provision and having a laugh about who the best local contractor to put the river crossings in is. It's all really effective. Here's an example from nutrient efficiency training. This is one of the Cork catchments. Local pollutants of concern would be your N, your P, your sediment. And the idea was to show them pictures of rivers that they see every day that they're crossing the bridge, and the task is to connect the impact with the pollutant. You'll have seen this picture in Anne's presentation, but this is what you see from the Marybrook Bridge. And what are you seeing? You're seeing the sediment. So it's a very local connection, drive over the bridge, and here's what you'll find. With nitrogen, maybe the visual impact might not be as local, but it's all connected. And here's the estuary that you might spot, or if you're kind of headed out there in the summertime, the the headline there says an awful lot about it. But back locally again, drive over this bridge and here's your nutrients again. And actually, for the locals who couldn't make it to the seaside, they told us this was their Ballybunion back in the day, and you can't even see the river now because of the eutrophication. So those links are always there. But also to point out the good examples too. This water body is actually part of the Blackwater Catchment. You can read up on it in your Better Farming for Water, 8 Actions for Change Catchment Management Plan. And these are the water bodies that inspire us, the ones that inspire us to work and protect them. Maybe for the last 3 minutes, you'll have seen me trying to find ways to make a local community hall as visually interesting as possible. And you might think there's something missing from the farmer training. But of course, we were trying to get out. Nothing beats site-specific learning. It's that great way to bring other voices into it as well. On your left, there's Noel Feeney, actually bringing us through his approach, an excellent approach to runoff risk assessment. On your right, there's Micheál Trayers, sheep farmer. And listening to him talk to 75 people about what he's learned, really, really impactful. He's talking about being willing to do his tree planting, talking about pulling the fencing back from the river. We pay all the way out to 20 metres. Maybe he doesn't want to go all the way to 20, but the farmer controls their involvement in the programme. And that's actually a powerful message to get across. That's actually the Springfield River you're looking at there. And just to finish on Smile, it's out in the fields. That's where we see ourselves more and more in terms of storytelling, case studies and communications and engagement. And it's the habitats of our catchments. They've been assessed at this point, as Anne said. We'll want to share the before and after of what that looks like with advisors and farmers. Same with the runoff risk assessments and the supporting actions that they'll be putting in the ground over the summer. And I just wanted to finish with this, because this kind of idea of young and old alike getting excited and inspired, because I suppose the key thing for me to finish on is when people take the time and are given the time to get to know their local river and what's in it, then good things can happen.
Great. Ross, a really positive note to finish on there. And it's great to see that engagement from both farmers and the broader community, which is so critical, because it's a resource we all depend on. And I think that why part that you talked about earlier on, Anne, is so important, that we can have these temporary programs and so on, but we don't have that legacy of people really understanding the impact and of their actions, but also the value of having high quality water is really, really important. So I suppose, maybe my question to you, Anne, it's a broad question, but what does success look like from your perspective towards the end of this project? What would you like to see as one of the, or some of the major outcomes?
I think one, and I said, I meant when I said that the education and awareness is a huge part of the programme. Success to me would be where we do have a cohort of advisors and farmers who really understand what their activities, how their activities impact on the environment and water quality particularly, and what they can do about it, and that they're empowered to make these positive decisions. I think that would be a hugely positive outcome. The other one for me is this focus on the hydromorphology and the bits of the hydromorphology that are within a farmer's control, particularly these riparian zones. We have lost them to a large extent. Fields now go right up to rivers, and that has almost become a norm. And it's trying to reclaim a little bit of space for the river that can act as part of the river hydrology. There are other more intractable issues that maybe will depend on policy or broader scale measures. But even those two things, to improve the hydromorphology, looking at the bits that are within a landowner's control. So for example, the sedimentation in the islands, there are some simple fixes for that are within a landowner's control that wouldn't impact on the productivity of their farms or how they go about their business, just slight changes in attitude and behaviour. So for me, those are some of the wins that we would be aiming to get.
And are you engaging with the broader, I suppose, actors around the agriculture, Ross? When I know I attended a water quality conference a number of years ago where a colleague was showing how a farmer had recently bought some land, and the contractor, in collaboration with the farmer, had done a lot of cleaning or clearing works along the river banks. I suppose not fully understanding the impact of what they were doing. That I suppose they thought they were tidying the place up and so forth, but maybe weren't really helping the situation from a water quality point of view.
Yeah, look, we gave the example there of the islands and them having the laugh about who the best person to put in the river crossing were, but that's absolutely crucial to the next phase of the project, to the point at which the shovels are out and we're getting into it, is working with the people who'll be doing the work and being as hands-on as possible as we can to show them what good looks like, and really driving that one on.
Philip, we've lots of really good questions coming through.
We do. I might just bring Anne back to the start of her presentation. I will jump in. I know there's great questions there, and I'll get them answered. But just Anne, you started off with the high status objective water bodies. It's a fairly severe story in terms of decline in the high status objective. Do you know if that's the same across Europe, in other European countries, or are we a unique story, or where we sit?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we probably have a higher percentage of high status waters left than other European countries. We're one of the few that has managed to hang on to them to some extent.
Okay, so this project is kind of given that the best chance of halting it or turning it around through the policy side of it. I suppose if you were to look at a high status objective water body, would you be able to tell that it is one, or how would you tell it's pristine, or how would someone find out if they're beside one or farming on one or not?
Well, there's lots of information on catchments.ie where you can look at monitoring data and you can look at the status that's assigned to a water body. The EPA are responsible for deciding on the status. They monitor a range of parameters, some of which are visually obvious and some of which aren't. So they look at the chemistry, they look at the biology, they look at the hydromorphology, they look at the plants, they look at the riverbed. There's a huge number of elements taken into account. But generally speaking, if you look at a river that looks fairly natural and you've got nice clean gravel in the riverbed and lots of aquatic life and visually clean water, chances are it's in pretty good condition.
Brilliant. That's going to lead me on to one of the questions that came in, but the last one there from your presentation, the work you're doing is on the blue dot side of it and that, but is it applicable to the other water bodies that are not high status objectives?
Absolutely. I think all of these measures would benefit all water bodies across the spectrum. While we are focusing on the high status and checking how effective they are in bringing us back to high status, they are applicable across the board.
So one of the questions that came in and was a bit about what you're saying there. There's a big downturn in the high status objective water bodies. Did the metrics change over time that let that happen, or was this a land use change thing, or did regulations lead to that decline in high status objective water, or where do you think that change occurs from?
There's lots of drivers of the change, and we have consultants at the moment looking into what has actually driven the change. There are parameters set down for high status, but they weren't always monitored. So one is the biology, the Q value, the chemistry, then there's the hydromorphology. We're monitoring more and more sites for hydromorphology, and ones that might pass on biology and chemistry are failing on hydromorphology. So there is that to take into account, but what doesn't lie is the Q value. We have consistent Q value going back to the 1970s. And if you look at that data set alone, it very clearly documents a true decline. As I say, the EPA is the agency that does the monitoring and is best placed to comment on what has driven these changes. But there is very definite, it's not a false decline because we're collecting more data. When you strip back the extra data and you look at the Q data, there is a very, very definite and strong decline since the late 80s. There has been periods when it's plateaued, there's been slight upticks, but on the whole, it's a downward trend.
On your framework documents there, you have a number of them from different pressures. Do you kind of hope to influence policy in every pressure, or is there a focus on one pressure than another from this scheme, say?
We're looking at forestry as well in quite a lot of detail. Again, that's one of the big pressures on high status objective rivers. We're developing or building on the work done by the Kerry Life programme and developing a desk-based risk assessment methodology. That's being followed up by field-based risk assessments. Then mitigation measures will be designed, implemented and monitored. So we would hope to influence the forestry programme in the future as well.
Are those booklets or the framework documents you have, are they for policy makers to read and use, or who are they for?
They're primarily aimed at practitioners at this point, and anybody who wants to know about what they can do about particular pressures. The one that's most developed is the agricultural one, and it's most comprehensive at this point.
So one of the questions came in. Oh yeah, sorry, Mark. Yeah.
Just to go back on one of the slides you had presented there, Anne, in relation to the need to reduce the loading, the nitrogen loading by, I think, 44 or to 44% of the overall. I think it was from 1,200 to back down to 522. Is it realistic to expect to be able to do that within by using that pathway receptor model, or is it a case that the original load needs to be reduced, or how do we square that circle?
The general thinking with nitrate, because it is so mobile, is that source reduction is the best measure, or source reduction or mobilization reduction. So that's where the timing and the precision of the fertilizer application come in, where the use of things like the most grass growth model, where a farm specific recommendation can be given based on the historical grass growth, the historical weather forecasting or weather conditions and the weather forecast. Teagasc can give really good and precise advice to a farmer, and that will reduce the losses, the potential losses, increase the uptake by plants and reduce the potential losses. So yeah, pathway interception is not considered to be effective for nitrogen at all. So it's those source control and mobilization control methods that are most effective.
Okay. And do you see a need to start looking at adjustments around stocking rates, or to try and address some of that pressure, or is it a question of and look, it's a difficult question, I know, but I'm just wondering, are we putting a lot of effort into alternative measures when, is there a single solution here, or am I being oversimplistic? And I'm being a bit provocative.
I suppose. Yeah, I suppose we have to explore all of the other measures before we go down that route. We don't have modeling capability, so we are reliant on measuring the effectiveness. So we are trying to encourage uptake of these measures that will try and minimize the nitrogen surpluses, try and minimize the losses of nitrogen by carefully matching it to crop requirements. When we see how effective that is when you have a wide-scale uptake, then we can look to see if we need to go beyond that. But decisions around stocking rate are really government policy decisions. They're not for us really to...
I suppose it underlines the importance of engaging and exhausting these alternatives, really, because ultimately we don't really want to go down that route in the longer term. Maybe Ross, you just mentioned around the capacity for behavioral change and resources required to achieve that. Could you elaborate on that for us, please?
Again, so we really took the time to review the year one program with the advisors, so reliant on them. And they're so keen to do as much as they can, be it Teagasc, be it the private lads. But it was just so clear, all of the things that they're trying to manage, all of the key messages that they're expected to get across from different actors, and ultimately there's X amount of time and Y amount of jobs, and so primarily their work on our behalf is the habitat assessment, which does its own work when you add the funding in behind it. Similarly with the runoff risk assessment, that one's probably more collaborative with the farmer. We want them walking the ground together, and we want them essentially trained up to the same level where they can do it and challenge each other on it. But again, at that point, when that job is done, they need to be able to move on to get that plan in place. But it was really interesting to go through the review process with the advisors, because they all wanted to find some way to make a personal connection, to check in with the farmer as a person, as well as a farmer who's trying to do a job, as well as a farmer who's trying to help them do their job. Trying to find ways to share new thinking with them, trying to find ways to challenge with them. But there's a limitation to that. So it's just about understanding if we really are in the game of behavioral change, rather than, as Anne said, it's a government job to do something, and like the regulatory aspect and compliance have to fix into things. But if we're trying to win hearts and minds and change behaviours, we're going to need more, and we're going to need to be allowed to do more.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Sorry, Philip, I interrupted you earlier on there, but I just wanted to cover off some of those areas.
Very good. Ross, just we'll stick with the advisor part in that for a minute. Well, it must have been a huge advantage to those advisors to get that training. Like if the feedback was so good, as in they're so positive about it, did the word spread or did it get more people interested or how did that work for the project?
We really felt, Philip, for year two that I suppose we had to kind of prove ourselves to that advisory group a little bit in year one, and really interesting to see how engaged they were on our behalf in year two. I suppose the main way we saw that was their willingness to try and bring more of their clients and more of the farmers into the program, and really spread the word that way. I think the other thing that we said to lads at the time as well was, this is all going in a certain direction. Like, this is stuff that, you might want to know now and be expected to know in future. So it is that chance of getting ahead in the game. And I think people appreciated that as well.
Was there much, is my own principle now, but I always think there's a lot of innovation comes from the ground up. Was there much from farmers in the catchment that either give you ideas or influenced the scheme, or even advisors influenced the scheme and that side of it?
Oh, stop. Sure. It was brilliant. I think, to be fair to us, we tried to build that into the training as well. Never waste that opportunity to ask farmers questions, record the answers and document them, So in terms of like the catchment management plans that we're working off of and building in terms of action, I would say a lot of that is based on the local knowledge that you just can't beat and that you won't get as well from anywhere else as just talking to lads around the table.
Just in case I don't get to ask the question towards the end, can farmer or advisors still get involved, or even farmers still get involved, be it an expression of interest in some form, or what way is that in these catchments?
So, sorry, Rex, go ahead.
Yeah, we've just kind of finished. We're in the final stages of the year two recruitment. So we would have captured our expressions of interest last year, and now we're moving through into kind of bringing them on board and getting those contracts signed. That is the bulk of our recruitment at this point. And I think, do you know what, and I'll just throw over to you, because the next bit really is in terms of kind of strategic, in terms of how we want to look to bring more people in.
Yeah. So, Philip, we are reviewing where we've gotten farmers already involved and where we've gotten expressions of interest geographically. There are a few high priority areas for us. So, for example, we have a number of mini catchments in the Shornock where we know there are short pathways, groundwater pathways to surface water. We want to get a high level of buy-in in those areas, because those are the areas where you're likely to get a quick response in the river. So if we can get good uptake of measures in those areas, it will or should allow us to see what the impact on the surface water is within the life of the project. So if we haven't gotten good buy-in in those areas, we'll target those areas, visit the farmers, talk to them about the project and try and get them on board. Similarly, there's areas in the Islands catchment where we're working with IFI on some river restoration works, just some in-stream works to improve habitat. And would be important to get the farmers adjacent to those works on board. So again, when we've reviewed where we've gotten good buy-in, if there's gaps in that, we'll target those specifically. Also, there's some other geographical areas, say in the Odd Beg, where we know there's an area very leaky for nitrate. That's another area where we'd be looking at the level of uptake and then targeting the gaps to try and get more farmers on board there to give us the best chance of trying to assess the measures.
Very good. Just one more, Mark, there, unless I can continue if you want, but another one came in, is there grants or funding for non-farmers, for community groups there, or what way do you steer that?
To our project, we haven't done any of that kind of grant work yet, but we're open to working with community groups. We are talking to a few community groups. One of them is Rewild Wicklow, and we are happy to talk to community groups about work they're doing that could further the objectives of the project. So what we're talking to Rewild Wicklow is things around control of invasive species, tree planting, and we're happy to support any community groups who want to get involved in that from a river point of view. Just
to support that as well, I suppose the project isn't doing the right thing if it's trying to be everything to everyone. So in that scenario where we maybe should just be signposting straight over to the funding available through LawPro and using the partnerships that we have and always making sure that we're pointing people in the right direction rather than trying to do everything ourselves.
Yeah. It would be very specific when we would get involved with a community group like the Rewild Wicklow.
And as someone pointed out to me before, farmers are part of the community too, so they're not a different cohort. Some of the more semi-practical stuff, if you can answer it, you're doing a lot for riparian margins there. There's some, there's a minimum requirement on farms. Some guys are doing their best, particularly with the catchment approach that you're doing. There could be some other guy at the other side of the river that's doing the opposite of everything you'd like to do in the scheme. Have you a role in influencing that, or what's an approach to that, or what's been a guy's, farmer's response to that, do you think?
All we can do is encourage people, give them information, raise their awareness of what best practice is, try and change their behaviour and incentivize them through the project to change. But we've no role in enforcement, no role in cross reporting. Ours is very much voluntary all the way.
But what we are seeing is we're seeing a lot more people in the community, farmers included, who want to see more accountability for those examples. I think that's relatively new. It's not something we've seen before. It's really encouraging.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm not sure where that hour disappeared to. Thank you, Anne and Ross, for really excellent presentations, and just to compliment you on the excellent work that you're doing. And no doubt this project will feed into the future CAP strategic plan for Ireland, and hopefully we'll see some of those measures being scaled out across the country. I know previous burn projects and similar life projects have also been very instrumental in influencing those policy side of things. So I hope that will I'm sure that will take place, given that the Department of Agriculture are a partner on the project as well. Philip, thanks very much for helping with questions this morning. It's great to have somebody with your expertise as well helping out. Next week, we are going to be joined actually by John Muldowney from the Department of Agriculture, who's going to be talking about engagement and status of extensive grasslands under the Acres programme. So we look forward to being joined by John next week. So until then, we hope you enjoy the fine weather. And thanks again to Anne and Ross for joining us, and Philip this morning. So take care. You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.